learners, to today's session, we will be continuing towards inequality and indifference, which we were discussing in the previous video. So continuing with that, let us discuss what John Rousseau, a political thinker, talked about inequality. So he said that among the human species, there are basically two kinds of inequalities. One which he calls natural or physical, because it is established by nature and consists in a difference of age, health, bodily strength, and the qualities of the mind or the soul. And another, the second kind of inequality which he discusses, is called moral or political inequality, because it depends on a kind of convention and is established or at least authorized by the consent of me. So this was the moral or political inequality which he talked about. So what we can say that according to Rousseau, the first type of inequality is natural and therefore is given, while the second type is socially created and therefore will benefit a few over the majority. Now, sociologists point out that natural and moral equality are not completely unrelated. For example, intelligence quotient, when we talk about, intelligence is measured by intelligence quotient. And IQ tests in the United States have found that whites on an average have higher score than blacks. But does that mean that whites are naturally more intelligent than blacks? Can the income gap between the communities be explained by the higher intelligence of the white? But this is being explained by the following facts. Number one, when we talk about intelligence, is a product of both genetic and environmental factors. This we have to understand, that it is both genetic and environmental factors which play a role in deciding the intelligence. So the social background of the individual influences his IQ scores. Deprived social backgrounds will negatively influence the scores. And intelligence tests are not really objective. They are based on white middle class knowledge and skills. So this is again another important point to note. The tests only measure only part of the mental capacities of the individuals and therefore are not universally valid. When we talk about biological differences, they do not readily become social inequalities. Andrew Bethe points out that natural inequality is based on differences in quality, and the qualities are not just there, so to say, in nature. They are as human beings define them in different societies, in different historical epochs. He also says that the identification as well as the gradation of qualities is a cultural and not a natural process. So this one has to understand. He writes that nature presents us only with differences or potential differences. With human beings, these differences do not become inequalities unless and until they are selected, marked out and evaluated by the processes that are cultural and not natural. In other words, we can say that differences become inequalities only with the application of scales. And the scales with which we are concerned in talking about inequalities in a social context are not given to us by nature, but culturally constructed by whom? Particular human beings, say, under particular historical conditions. And that is what was true in case of designing the IQ tests also. Dipankar Gupta points out that differences in language, religion, race or sex are differences that are in themselves and do not contain the property of inequality. This may not, however, be the popular understanding of these differences. He says that though differences cannot be placed in a hierarchical order, they are not allowed to retain their horizontal statuses. They usually tend to get hierarchized in popular consciousness. And this is where prejudice takes over. So one has to understand how prejudices are created in a systematic and planned way. Men are deemed to be superior to women, Certain linguistic groups are held to be less civilized and cultivated than others, and religious bigotry prevails. All because most of us are not conditioned to tolerate differences and versus the other differences. So this is what is basically the prejudices which are there in the mind of people. And some of the groups which are discriminated because of their natural differences are, as we said earlier also, men and women. Apart from the fact that men are generally physically stronger than women, there is no biological evidence to show that women are incapable of doing the tasks that men do. Yet it is often held that men are better suited to manage outside work, while women are better suited to do household work and care for their children. This is the general presumption. Now, secondly, it's racial differences. So, the European justification for colonization of other people was mainly based on the fact that the white race was more advanced and evolved than other races and therefore had a role in civilizing them. So, that was the basis on which they colonized the nations. And pseudo-scientific theories based on Darwinism was used to justify the oppressive rules of the natives. Now moving on to talk about culture and inequality. Let's try to understand that the qualities used to judge the relative position of groups vis-a-vis other groups are defined by social and cultural processes rather than scientific facts. It is also clear that the qualities that are selected and used to make these judgments will be derived from the existing body of knowledge of that society. But knowledge production in any society depends largely on the position of the producer in the social structure. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels in the Communist Manifesto say that the ruling ideas of each age have ever been the ideas of its ruling class. According to a prominent contributor to the sociology of knowledge, Karl Mannerheim, all the knowledge and ideas, although to different degrees, are bound to a location within the social structure and the historical process. Likewise, women advocating the need of a perspective from below says that the process of production of knowledge and advantages and disadvantages emanating one's location in the social structure is basically linked. It is not to suggest that all knowledge is partisan in nature, rather than to show that knowledge is not always objective and factual. Common people's everyday experiences with members of other communities color and reinforce these biases, and then they become established as facts. And that's how prejudices are also created. It is not only academic knowledge that is affected by these biases and partisan attitude, but also our everyday experiences take place in common places, like say in the street, workplace, markets, educational institutions, during political activities. All these are affected. People do not consciously give much importance to these interactions, but nevertheless are influenced by them. It is not often understood that it is pre-existing biases in the observer that influenced his perception or her perception, and his or her conclusions has merely reinforced his or her bias. Now let us talk about inequality and the difference in India in the context of tribals. Indian political leaders after India's independence from British rule very well understood the challenge of creating an egalitarian social order in a deeply hierarchical society. India's diversity in religious beliefs, value systems, customs and traditions made the task even more difficult. So with this background, while the Western societies had become egalitarian over a long period of time, the Indian state had to achieve an equitable order in a much shorter period. Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of Indian Constitution, described the challenge Indian democracy faced. He said, the third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it the social democracy. So, what does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. And these principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. They form a union of trinity. In the sense, we can say that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions, and that is what Dr. Ambedkar said. He said, in politics we will have equality, and in social and economic life we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. So let us see what Indian state's response is to the tribal situation. The Indian government recognized that the tribes are socially, culturally, and economically diverse from other categories of Indians and therefore needed a different approach. Some of the policies or approaches that reflect this concern are, one was provision of equality. So in the provisions for equality, there are Constitution articles, say Article 14, 15 and 16, and then granting aid specific to scheduled tribe, that is 275(1). Then there are provisions for preventing discrimination of tribes. There are protective articles of the Indian Constitution. There is a National Commission for Scheduled Tribes, a constitutional body to protect the rights of the scheduled tribes. There are protective legislations like prevention of atrocities against scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Then are provisions for recognizing and preserving differences. The Panchsheel or the 5-point approach formulated by Warrior Elvin and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru to tribal situation, which advocated minimal governance and autonomy and the right to develop according to their own way. Schedule 5 and Schedule 6 of the Constitution gave limited autonomy to the tribes to govern themselves, and the Panchayat Extension Scheduled Areas Amendment, which gave additional powers to the Panchayats to govern tribal majority and areas and administer land use. Indian market and civil society's response to tribal situation has been no longer, like what we have to understand is that in this context, the tribals are no longer isolated from non-tribes. Contact between the tribes and non-tribes are increasing due to migration and forced displacement. Everyday experiences in interacting with others are as important as government legislations ensuring equality and protection in defining tribal perception of themselves and non-tribes. Tribal and non-tribal interaction takes place in rural as well as urban areas. In rural area, a number of studies have shown that the tribal experience has been largely negative. It has increased tribal alienation and caused frustration and anger among the tribal groups. Raja Kanti Das, he studied Orao in Midnapur, and he showed that the Oraos were adopting certain elements of Hinduism from their neighbors as an adaptive measure while striving for maintaining their identity and community organization. But in spite of these steps, the Oraos were losing their jobs to the new migrants to the town. Bhaumik, in his study of the 21 Lodha villages in the Midnapur, showed that frustration is driving them towards crime. There have been a number of studies that show how tribes have been brought into the Hindu fold by incorporating tribal gods into the Hindu pantheon. Their assimilation, if successful, makes the tribe a caste within the caste system. The study of Patnaik of Savara tribe in Orissa shows their gradual adoption of Hindu customs and becoming an untouchable caste. Local power equations play an important role in determining the ritual status and position of the caste. Historically, when we see such tribes are placed in the lower positions in the caste hierarchy, though there have been instances of tribes being accepted as Kshatriyas. Christian methods to convert tribes have been more direct and involve a break from their earlier animistic beliefs. Both these processes have often resulted in the loss of tribal identity. While in many cases the assimilation into larger community might have given the tribal community greater security, in many cases it has caused violent conflicts between the tribes and non-tribes and between tribes itself. There have been instances of forceful rejection of Hindu and Christian beliefs and a return to traditional beliefs. In urban areas, the nature of contact between the tribal and non-tribal has been different because of the relative anonymity prevailing in the cities. However, we see here too people's perception about tribals as negativity, and this has influenced the interaction patterns. Stereotypes about tribes are found in the language, representations, and nature of interactions of everyday life situations. When we talk about popular stereotypes about tribals, we generally find that tribals, especially from the northeast, who have Mongoloid features, are not Indians. They are treated as, they are called Chinese and therefore called Chinky, and such remarks are made against them. Recently, a chief minister of a northeastern state complained that he is questioned whether he is an Indian almost every time he comes to Delhi for official work. So there is a common problem for many people, tribals and non-tribals from northeastern India, where they have faced such problems and have reported. By calling them Chinese, even in a lighter way, we delegitimize the very existence of tribals in their own country. And this is a serious cause of concern. Tribal women are considered physically strong and sturdy, and what happens because of that? They are seen as docile and obedient to their patrons at the same time, and these rare qualities are seen as making them suitable for becoming good domestic workers. So this widely accepted belief has contributed to creating a huge demand for tribal domestic workers in all major cities, leading to large-scale trafficking of women from tribal areas to urban areas. It can be argued that this is a positive quality seen by others in tribal women, and that tribal women are employed because of this stereotype. However, this belief also essentializes the tribal women by relating them to one low prestige, low income jobs. Women have been seen as the cultural emblems of their community, and tribal women are seen as promiscuous. Women's body is seen as a site for cultural domination in our patriarchal society. So not surprisingly then, men have seen the others' women as being sexually promiscuous and their own women as being virtuous and modest. Popular representations in film and plays almost always show tribes in negative or comic roles. They are portrayed as irrational, the outsider. The hero or the heroine is often captured by the tribes in the forest and is going to be killed, and very next instance becomes sacred and holy due to completely unrelated silly occurrence which convinces the simple-minded tribes. Tribes are depicted as wearing minimal clothes and interested mainly in drinking and dancing. This is how it is portrayed in cinema and different kind of plays. Everyday language, phrases and usages reinforce stereotypes, and this is how stereotypes are created. Often tribes and their supposed characteristics used as figures of speech to indicate negative traits in the individuals. It is common to find in all Indian languages phrases and usages which compare negative traits like foolishness, laziness, unhygienic habits, and unkempt looks to certain tribes. For example, why are you looking dumb like a name of a tribe? You smell like name of a tribe. So this is the questions which are asked, and this is how a stereotype is reinforced. Northeastern men and women are often not recruited for jobs that have public profile, like say hotel management. Modeling and airlines are some examples. A lack of Indian looks is cited as a reason. This is a study done by Dovai and Nikita in 2009, which points out such findings. The examples that are found in everyday situations reflect the nature of tribal and non-tribal interaction in civil society. In this context, you can make an observation of everyday life, how differences in human beings result in differential treatment and discrimination. So by this, I hope you have understood the concept of equality, inequality and the differences. Now coming to the end of this session, I will just sum up. The tribal communities in India are in many ways culturally and socially different from others. The degree and areas in which these differences are manifested differ from tribe to tribe and from region to region. The reason is that the tribes are not one homogeneous community as was thought of earlier. Also, they are part of the dynamic social and cultural process that takes place in every society. However, these characteristics of tribes must not be seen by others as an end of differences between tribes and non-tribes. The differences are real and very much tangible. Non-tribes people often wonder why the tribes do not join the mainstream, especially since they are given a lot of privileges like reservations, special grants, etc. They do not often realize that what they demand is the assimilation of tribal population into the majority population. The mainstream imagination of India often is narrow. According to them, the social and cultural criteria for an Indian is very much their own culture and social characteristics. So in reality, they view only themselves and people like them to be the mainstream. Therefore, they want the tribes to be like themselves. And this is not acceptable to the many tribes who want to maintain their distinct culture and lifestyle. The Constitution promises equality of status and of opportunity. That is, in the preamble of the Indian Constitution, the government has passed a number of legislations and formulated programs to move towards equality. How is it only when social perceptions undergo a change that the goal of equality of all will be closer? The so-called mainstream Indians will have to better understand the much quoted but not well understood words unity in diversity if they want a better India. Bete proposed a distinction between harmonic system in which society is divided into groups that are hierarchically placed and the ordering is considered as appropriate. And the second is disharmonic systems in which there is no consistency between the order in which groups are arranged and the natural scheme of things. That is, there is a discrepancy between the existence and the normative orders. He explained the disharmonic system in terms of one which upholds equality as an ideal but practices inequality. So with this, I would come to the end of the session. Thank you very much. Hope you've understood the concepts of equality, inequality and the difference. Kindly go through the video and read the transcript in order to better understand the topic. Thank you.